Good day to you out there, and thanks for tuning in. This is the second of our podcasts, second of a weekly series to discuss the Lewis and Clark expedition. The focus will be on the journal entries for the current week to illuminate our listeners as to where the Corps of Discovery is and what they're doing at the time, whether it be in 1804, 1805, or 1806, the years of the expedition. Occasionally events in 1803 and before will be discussed, and events after the return in 1806 will sometimes also be discussed. The language used in the podcast assumes that the listener tuned in to the prior podcast. This podcast is being produced and presented by the Missouri River Basin Lewis and Clark Interpretive Trail and Visitor Center in Nebraska City, Nebraska. You can find us on Facebook by searching MRB Lewis and Clark Center, and check out our website at lewisandclarkvisitorscenter.org. We are located along the Missouri River, along the route of the expedition. We have 3 floors of Lewis and Clark themed exhibits, walking trails, and a Plains Indian Earth Lodge replica. On July 18, 1804, the Corps camped 4 miles south of our building's location, and on the 19th they camped 2 miles north of us on the Nebraska side of the river. My name is Adam, and I will be leading the podcast today, a one-man show this week. August 8th to August 14th, 1804. Headed up the Missouri River, the Corps started near modern-day Takema, Nebraska, and made it to about 10 miles south of modern Sioux City, Iowa. As the Corps of Discovery was headed upstream in what is now northeastern Nebraska and western Iowa, the main theme for the week in 1804 is, where is Moses Reid? Moses Reid was a private on the expedition. The day after they left Camp Council Bluff, Moses Reid, according to John Ordway on his journal, on the 4th of August, wrote that Reid went back for his knife. Clark writes in his journal on the same day that Reid had not yet returned. The next day, Clark writes, and this is all one sentence, so I'm just going to quote it all at once. "Mosquitoes very troublesome. Reid, the man who went back for his knife, has not yet joined us." So Reid wasn't back yet, and MusquitorersVerubleson. Mosquitoes very troublesome. As a reader of the journals, I, for one, am glad that Clark couldn't spell. It makes for some entertaining times when you're not really looking for humor. It just finds you. But the fact that Moses Reid did not make it back the night before seems explainable. There are many nights during the expedition when various members, including the captains, are encumbered for one reason or another while out hunting or exploring, and they just can't make it back to camp. But a couple days later, Clark wrote that, "We have every reason to believe that one man has deserted, Moses B. Reid." The captains then dispatched George Drouillard, Reuben Fields, William Bratton, and Francois Labiche to find him. Now, if you're familiar with the expedition, the members' biographies, you probably form an opinion that the captains took this potential desertion very seriously. George Drouillard was the best hunter and the best shot on the expedition. Sending him off risked days of missed hunting production and the increased chance that the Corps' best shot could be killed or lost in the undertaking. William Bratton was one of the 3 blacksmiths on the expedition, a skill that was completely essential. If the blacksmiths were lost, there'd be no one to skillfully and artistically perform repairs on tools and weapons and everything in between. In those days, blacksmithing was an art that took years of apprenticeship and experience not to mention the aptitude. Labiche was a skilled hunter, boatman, and trader, and he knew the languages of the lower Missouri natives as well as French. His loss would have been immense for obvious reasons also. Now, in addition to Moses B. Reid, one of the Corps' engagees had also gone missing the prior week. There were likely 8 engagees at the time the Corps set out from St. Louis. Engagees were not enlisted men. They were hired hands to help with the labor of reaching the Mandan village. The name that this man went by was La Liberté, and he was not presumed deserted at this point the way that Moses Reid was. And since he was not an enlisted man, so the captain's military jurisdiction did not quite apply to him the way it did for Moses Reid. Spoiler alert, next week we will find out what has happened to both Moses Reid and La Liberté. The mysteries will be solved. August 1st to August 8th, 1805. In southwest Montana, just northeast of modern-day Beaverhead Rock State Park, to about 10 miles southwest of Dillon, Montana, still traveling west. Last week we ended 1805's discussion with the comments that they needed to find the Shoshone, and fast. The summer was wearing long, and they still had far to go. They needed horses and guides to get them through the Bitterroot Mountains. They needed some encouragement, and on August 8th, that is exactly what happens. On that date, Meri Lewis writes, "The Indian woman recognized the point of a high plain to our right, which she informed us was not very distant from the summer retreat of her nation on a river beyond the mountains which runs to the west. This hill that she pointed out, she says her nation called the Beaver's Head, from a conceived resemblance of its figure to the head of that animal. She assures us that we shall either find her people on this river or on the river immediately west of its source, which from its present size cannot be very distant." Wow, she mentions west-flowing water. The moment when Sacagawea recognized Beaverhead Rock, which is located in present-day Madison County, Montana, must have been the most uplifting moment since leaving Fort Mandan that spring. She recognized the landmark from her childhood and guarantees they will find her people nearby. That is great news indeed. And the next day Lewis sets out to find the Shoshone. So, Sacagawea, how do you pronounce her name, and how do you spell it? Tsakaka-wei translates directly to Shoshone as bird woman, and of course she was a Shoshone Indian. Sakakawea is the official spelling of the 3 tribes of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. So how do you pronounce it, and how do you spell it? I think it depends on your point of view or your preference, but as an opinionated response here to that question, I don't think there is a wrong way to pronounce the name if respect to her spirit is shown when saying the name. But just a little background on her. She was born into the Lamy Shoshone tribe of present-day East Central Idaho. She joined the expedition when her French husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, joined in the winter of 1804 at Fort Mandan in present-day central North Dakota. She was 16 years old. Clearly a lot to unpack here. What was a teenage Native American from a central Idaho tribe doing with a different tribe hundreds of miles to the east? And why was she married to a 37-year-old French guy? Well, Sacagawea was captured by the Hidatsa several years prior when she was about 12 years old. She was later sold to Charbonneau as a slave. Charbonneau was living with the Hidatsa as a trader at the time, and he claimed Sacagawea and another Shoshone slave woman he had purchased as his wives. In February 1805, she gave birth to a son, who would soon become America's youngest explorer. More time will definitely be devoted to these people in future podcasts, but for now, back to the timeline at hand. On August 11th, 1805, contact is made as Lewis encounters a Shoshone warrior on horseback. Lewis tries to communicate with him using a word translated from Sacagawea, but the translation was muffled somewhere along the line, and the man fled. On August 13th, 2 days later, several Shoshone people and their dogs are spotted about a mile away. In his journal, Lewis writes, "When we had arrived within half a mile of them, I directed the party to halt, and leaving my pack and rifle, I took the flag, which I unfurled and advanced singly towards them. The women soon disappeared behind the hill. The man continued until I arrived within 100 yards of him, and then he likewise fled. Though I frequently repeated the word tababone sufficiently loud for him to have heard it." It's little wonder why they fled. This was likely the first white man that any of them had ever seen, and the word he was shouting, tababone, Lewis thought translated to friend. It actually means stranger to the Shoshone. But they continued on and shortly later joined up with several other Shoshone, a young girl and an old woman. Trinkets were given, and Lewis had their faces painted in a manner symbolizing peace to the Shoshone. 2 miles ahead, 60 mounted warriors came storming down upon them. They were evidently alerted to the white man's presence. Lewis advanced on them without his gun, and the warriors, upon seeing the trinkets bestowed on the 2 women and conversing with the 2 women, they embraced the white men. Peace pipes were smoked, and trinkets were bestowed upon the Shoshone by the white men. Lewis later wrote in his journal, "But the chief added that there was a little amount of timber ahead, and that the river was confined between inaccessible mountains, was very rapid and rocky, insomuch that it was impossible for us to pass either by land or water down this river to the great lake where the white men lived, as he had been informed. This was unwelcome information." So they had found the Shoshone at last, but the news, at this point anyway, was not promising. Next week we will learn more how the meeting with the Shoshone goes, and how a chance meeting with Sacagawea and another individual proves to be crucial to the success of the entire expedition. August 8th to August 14th, 1806. Traveling downstream in western North Dakota along the Missouri River, the Corps makes it as far as about 5 miles southeast of present-day Stanton, South Dakota. The 2 parties, which were separate since July 3rd, reunited on August 11th. They exchange stories, and from here on out they will remain one party aimed towards St. Louis until the completion of their enterprise. By August 14th, they have made it to the Hidatsa and Mandan villages, and they decide to camp in this location for 3 days to hold conference with them. They were back at Fort Mandan, where they'd spent the winter of 1804, 1805, or they were somewhere very near to it. But their friends, the Mandan and the Hidatsas, they had a warning for them, a potentially serious and dire warning. Hear all about it and the conference with the Mandan next week on week 3 of our journal podcast. This week's quote is by Thomas Jefferson. "Never put off till tomorrow what you can do today." Thank you for enduring my voice. I have a cold this week, and thank you for joining us for our installment of our series. This installment, we hope you'll subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube page.